Hi everyone, it's Ruth. In this video today, we're going to be looking at nature, focusing on nature. So we'll be bringing some natural materials into the printmaking process. Now, this is a really fun process and hopefully it'll be enjoyable as we go through it together. But we'll be making double prints today by basically printing both sides of our natural material at the same time. We're going to be focusing on texture. So the color of the natural material is not going to be as important, not for this project. But since nature is our main material for today, our main supply for today, we're going to spend a little time in the beginning just talking about some of the best material to use. So, first of all, when it comes to using natural material, the fresher, the better. That's always a good thing to keep in our mind. The fresher, the better. Because when those plants, those flowers, those herbs, the grasses, leaves, when they start to dry, they become brittle and fragile and they can kind of crumble up. I did some dried flowers for this specific print here. And as I was putting the ink on it, it started falling apart. And when I put it on my paper, it started crumbling even more. I was able to get one print, but once I lifted my paper up, I had to peel off the little pieces of the flower. It didn't hold up well. So you can use dried material. You'll get one, maybe two prints out of it, but it doesn't last. So the best material to use is going to be the freshest material you can get your hands on. The fresher the plant life is, the more durable it is, and the more times you can print with it. So if you pick your plants early, if you go out for a walk and grab some plants that you find, make sure you stick them in a little cup of water until you're ready to do the printing. Now, one of the things you want to look for, probably the main thing you want to look for, is texture, and you want lots of texture. So for this image here, I have a little Swiss Monstera leaf, and you can see there's a lot of veining in here that shows up in the print, right? Not only do we get some nice veining here and stem that show up, one of the great things about this leaf is that it has these lovely holes here. So we get texture not just from the veining of the leaf, right? But also the shape, right? And the different, like, I guess, outlines that those leaves can have. And so you want something that has character. It can be a simple leaf. You'll get a lot of patterning from that, but finding something that has a lot of veining in it. So for example, if you're picking a leaf, let me grab one real quick. So if I use this leaf from my house plant here, I can flip it over and with my thumb or finger, I can feel the veining in it. Once I know that that veining is there, I'll know that that will be a good plant to print. And I'll demo how to do that with this leaf here. Again, you can print with simple leaves that don't have a lot of veining, but in order to get a lot of that color, not color, a lot of those shapes, that design, you want something that has that texture to it. Yeah. Now, the next thing, let's talk about flowers. Flowers are a lot of fun to bring in, especially during the spring and summer when we have so much more access to them. I have an example here of some daisies that I used to print. And you can see daisies give really nice designs, right? There's not a whole lot of patterning that's in here, but because those petals are wrinkled and there's so many petals, you get a really nice shape when you print. Now, when it comes to flowers, generally, it's better to have a flower that has a sort of flat surface. We want it to look more flat, more daisy-like, and less rose-like or peony-like. Roses and peonies, they have a really big head, so many petals. It's hard to get a lot of texture when we print it, when we ink it up. So you want something that has, like I said, that kind of flat shape. Daisy, sunflower, even mums are really great to print with. But again, we want that flat surface. It'll still have volume, but we'll walk through how to print that. Next, some other material that's really great to use are going to be fresh herbs. So if you have fresh herbs in your garden or you buy them from the grocery store, those are perfect for printing, nature printing. So ones that have a lot of patterning or a lot of leaves on them are going to be things like thyme, rosemary, cilantro. Those are going to give you some really wonderful prints. You can get some designs, some prints from things like basil or mint leaves, but they're not going to be as detailed as something that has more leaves to it. Yeah. So that's a great option as well. You can also just look in your fridge. Sometimes we have carrot tops that we can use, sometimes cabbage leaves, sometimes the leaves that are on celery are perfect to use for printing. We can be creative with the things we have in our house as well. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is just going on a walk. Sometimes finding things outside as we're walking by, we can find some really great material that way. So things like dandelion leaves, even though the inside of the leaf doesn't have a lot of detail, it has a really wonderful shape that's really fun to print. You can use daylily leaves. It's just a straight leaf, but there's a lot of patterning and veining in that leaf just itself. Ivy leaves, oak leaves, basically anything that you find outside, you can find a way to print. And we'll go through a variety of them today. The good news is that if we use that fresh material, we'll be able to use that leaf or flower over and over again. You may not be able to use it the next day or a week from now, but you'll be able to make several prints in one sitting. So like this little monstera leaf that I have here, I made about 7 or 8 prints at the same time. I got to use that leaf over and over again. So we'll talk about that too. Now that we've talked about our plant material, let's talk about the other supplies we need for today's project. As we do every week, a great supply to start with is going to be our illustrated instructions. Now we're going to be doing the nature prints, and just like all our other instructions, we have a list of supplies at the top, which I'll go through in just a moment. And then our process is laid out step by step. I'll be guiding us through that process today, but know that if this is something that you enjoy and you want to keep doing, this is that recipe card. So go ahead and pull those illustrated instructions out, set them aside. We'll be going over that today. The next thing we need is going to be our paper. So if you have the kit, you'll be getting this little sketchbook. And this is perfect for printing. Sketch paper is nice and smooth, and in general, the smoother the paper, the nicer and cleaner the transfer of pigment is. However, when it comes to this type of printing, bringing in all sorts of paper is actually ideal, actually good. I'll demo how to do it with sketch paper, but I'll also talk about how to use other paper. So here I've got a couple examples of some different types of paper that I'll be using. I have a paper that I use to clean my brayer after other printing projects, but it has a really nice background, so it's good for printing. I have a jelly print here that didn't turn out well. It didn't have a lot of patterning or design, but it's going to be really great for doing some printing today. Old book pages, even copy paper, those are going to be really great for our printing process. Construction paper, origami paper, the sky is the limit. So we'll be using a few different pieces of paper in our process today. The next thing we need is going to be our block printing ink. You can use acrylic paint to do this project. It doesn't matter, like it doesn't really change or affect the print itself. Block printing ink is a little nicer because it's thicker, and so it actually transfers a little better when we're using the natural material, but acrylic paint works well. So either one will be good. I'll be using block printing ink today. So if you have your block printing ink, go ahead and pull that out. And then the last supply we need out of our kit is going to be that brayer. It's a tool that we use for every printmaking process we've done in our printmaking series. And it's a great tool to have on hand if printmaking is something that you enjoy. You will be using this quite a bit. We're going to be using that today to help transfer our pigment. So go ahead and pull out your brayer. The next thing I want to talk about is preparing our space. Excuse me. So I use a piece of foil that I work off. It helps me contain my mess. And as you can see, I've been using the same piece of foil over and over again. But it's good to kind of prep our space. So whether you're using foil or wax paper, whether you're using newspaper, disposable tablecloth, or even a tray, it's good to have that space protected. It's also good to protect our body. So it's a good idea to wear clothes you don't mind getting a little messy, or an apron like I do. I know I tend to be a little messy when it comes to art making, so wearing an apron is always a good idea for me. And then the last thing we want to make sure we have for our process today is going to be something we can use as a paint tray. I'll be using another piece of foil to keep my paint on. The process we're using is actually a little different from ones we've done in previous weeks. Instead of using like a piece of plexiglass or a small piece of foil, we're going to need kind of a larger space. We'll be inking up both sides of our plant material, so it's good to have a larger space that we can cover with ink. So getting out another piece of foil or a paper plate is a good idea. So let's go ahead and prep our space so we can start the printing process. I'm going to go ahead and pull out a few pieces of my sketch paper. Whenever we're doing any kind of acrylic paint or block printing ink, it's always good to have our paper set up and ready to go. We're using block printing ink today, so it gives us a little extra time to work with. We don't have to rush through. Acrylic paint kind of dries faster, so we have to work at a faster pace. But still, it's always good to have that paper ready. Now, let's take a look at our illustrated instructions. The process that we're going to go through today is putting that pigment on our paint tray or piece of foil. We'll use our brayer to kind of spread it out evenly. We want a nice even coat on that foil, and we want a nice even coat on that brayer. Because once we get that coat smooth and even, we'll add our plant material and make sure we roll that brayer across so we're inking up both sides. And once that material gets inked up, we'll put it on our printing paper and basically sandwich it in. So we'll have a printing paper on the bottom, our inked material, and then a printing paper on top. We'll give it a little pressure, rub it a little bit so that pigment transfers. And then once we lift up that paper, we'll have two prints that are very close to a mirror image of themselves. We're printing the front and the back. So it's getting a 2-for-1 deal, basically. We're getting a print of the front and the back at the same time. So let's start our printing process. I'm going to start off by walking us through how to print a flat piece of plant material. So something like a leaf. I'm going to pull out my leaf from my house plant. So once you have your material ready, let's go ahead and add that pigment to our paint tray. We'll want a little more than a blueberry size blob. Because we are doing we're inking up larger stencils, basically, we're going to need some more pigment. So once I get my dollop of ink on my paint tray, I'm going to take my brayer and just roll it across. And you can see I'm kind of spreading it out. Again, I'm not just wanting that even coat of pigment on my brayer, I'm wanting it on my paint tray, on my foil. Because what's going to happen after we roll that out, I have a nice surface here. I have a nice even layer on my brayer. I'm going to take my leaf and put it on top of my pigment. And then with my brayer, just very carefully roll it across. Yep. I'll pick it up and do the back side as well. So I've got ink covering it. You can see I'm not too worried about getting a whole lot of pigment on every inch of that green. What I'm wanting is pigment on all those ridges. Every part there is a vein, every part there's a stem. I want that detail to show. So it's not important to cover it up completely. It's important to just cover that texture, right? So once we get that covered, I'm going to move over just a little bit. I'm going to take my printing paper here, my sketch paper. I have one piece I'm going to put on the bottom and then very gently lay my plant material on top and then sandwich it between another piece or with another piece of paper and set it down. Now, one of the tricks that I've learned is holding one hand still, using one hand to hold the paper in place while the other hand does the rubbing. And so I'm pressing, not firm, but just giving a little pressure and making sure I'm rubbing across every part of that leaf that has pigment on it, the stem all the way up to the point, and just giving it a little pressure. Right? And then once we do that, we can very carefully lift our paper up and then very carefully lift that leaf up. And so you can see really nice transfer. You can see the veins in this leaf, the stem, a lot of that detail. And the good news is I can print again. Even though this has pigment on it, I can still print with it. I can put more pigment on and print another layer. Okay? So that's how to do a flat piece of plant material. Next, let's talk about flowers. So I'm going to add a little more pigment to my paint tray. Okay, and again with my brayer, roll it out. Whether you're working with acrylic paint or the block printing ink, you'll still want to do the same process. You want a nice piece covered and you want your brayer covered. So once I get that covered, I'm going to bring my flower in. And again, I'm printing a daisy here. The easiest way I found to print a daisy is to take, or a flower with that flat surface, is to take that flat part and put it face down. Right? Because then what we're going to do is take our brayer and very gently, very carefully roll on top of our flower. Now with the leaf, because it was flat, we could roll it across smoothly, right? Because this has volume to it, we have to be a little careful. We have to do it a little differently. And so I'm just going to, with one hand, press it down into the pigment, and with my other hand, just very carefully roll that brayer across. It'll take a little time to make sure all of that is covered, right? And again, you can see I'm not covering that whole flower in pigment, right? I'm just making sure those ridges, that texture is covered. That's what I want to see. And so once I get that covered, and take your time with it, hold that stem down and I want to kind of roll that brayer across. I want that to print as well. And then very carefully, we'll pick up that flower. And you can see there's already some ink on that surface, which is good. So very carefully, I'm just going to kind of lay it down and make sure I can cover up a little more of that surface. Now, we want to be gentle with it, even though it's fresh and a little stronger than dried material. You can see I've got some flowers that are starting to come off. It's okay if that happens. That's not going to be noticeable, but be gentle with it. Now, once I have that inked up, I'm going to again pull my paper out. So I've got some sketch paper here. I'll put my one layer on the bottom. And then with my flower, I'm going to put it face down. And very carefully, I'm going to move that stem and add my top paper. We want to be careful with it because we don't want a lot of movement. And again, the same thing. We're going to use one hand to kind of hold that paper in place while the other hand does that rubbing. We want to use thinner paper. So something like sketch paper, copy paper, construction paper, book pages. Those are really great because that top layer, you can easily bend as you're rubbing. You see that head of the daisy has some volume. And so I just want to carefully bend that paper as I'm pressing, bend it around, and then go down that stem. We want to make sure we're covering that whole surface, everything that has pigment on it. We want to make sure we're touching that on the paper, right? And so after I do that, after I've rubbed it and covered the whole surface, very carefully, I'm going to pull that paper up. And then very carefully pull up my plant material. And you can see I have two wonderful prints. I have the front and the back. The front has a really nice texture for that center head, right? We can see the details there. And the back has those lovely lines, right? So we've got two prints that came from a flower. So next I want to talk about what to do if you're using a plant that has quite a bit of volume to it. So I have this really lovely thistle-y type plant. I'm not sure. It comes in a lot of bouquets as a filler flower, but I'm going to be using this today. You'll see it has a lot of volume with this head, and so sometimes that can be a little difficult to print. So let's kind of walk through that one together. I'm going to add a little more pigment. And then carefully roll that brayer across. And then once I get that rolled out, I'll lay my voluminous thistle down. And again, just like I did with that daisy, very carefully roll my brayer across. Because there's a lot of volume, it's going to take me a minute to cover everything. We want to be gentle with it. We want to make sure we're rolling across as much of the surface as we can. Right? Rolling it across. And again, we want to be somewhat gentle with it, but we want to make sure that whole surface is being covered. We can take our time with it and gradually roll it around. And the more we move it, the greater chance we have of getting every place covered with pigment. And you can see, I'm not too worried about making sure that pigment is covering that whole thing. Because we're doing texture, I just want to make sure I'm getting a lot of those fine lines, those details covered. And that stem. So once I get that brayer or that rolled, that ink rolled across it, I'm going to pull out my paper again. So let me pull out my sketch paper here. I have my bottom paper that I'm working on. I'm going to lay my material on top, and then with my other piece of paper, sandwich it. Again, this is so big. There's a lot of volume here. I want to make sure I'm not moving that paper around. So I'm using one hand to hold it in place while I rub with the other. And because there's a lot of volume here, I'm going to need that thinner paper, like that sketch paper, copy paper, one that bends a little bit while I'm pressing. It can fold around all that material and just kind of take our time with it. We want to make sure we're covering that whole surface. And then once we do, we can carefully lift it up. So you see I have one print and I can lift my material up and I have the other, right? This lovely mirror image, right, of the front and the back. We get a lot of detail from it and we get a lot of patterning, right? So that's how to do something that's a little more round, a bigger plant material. So now I want to talk a little bit about printing multiple pieces at the same time. So I'm going to bring in my herbs. I've got some thyme that I'm going to use, and I don't even know what these are, but they came in a bouquet. They were cute little purple flowers, and so I'm going to print with those. So I've got lots of little pieces that I'm going to print together. So again, I'm just going to add a little extra pigment to my tray. And then again with that brayer, just kind of roll it out. Now, fresh herbs are really great to print with, and thyme is wonderful because thyme has all these little leaves on there that can add such great detail. It makes it look really kind of delicate, which is nice in a print. So I'm going to hold them all kind of together a little bit, and then very carefully roll my brayer across, okay? And then pick it up. We've got pigment that's on both sides, right? I'm going to roll it just again. I'm going to pick it up and move it and then bring my flowers in. What we're doing is inking up everything first and then laying it on our paper. So I'm just going to carefully roll my flowers. Kind of flip them over. Make sure we're covering both sides. All right. And then once we have that rolled out, we'll get our paper now. So for this one, I'm going to use my jelly print here as my background. And then just very carefully lay out some of my pieces. Because we're using block printing ink, we have a little extra time to place things. So we don't have to really rush too much. So I'm just going to lay those pieces out. Right. And once I have them laid out in a way I like, I'm going to take another piece of paper. I'll use my sketch paper and press it on top. Now, one of the things I want to mention is, we're talking about thinner paper being on top, and that's so we can kind of press it around all those pieces, right? So no matter the size, that thin paper gives us the freedom to kind of press everything down. If you want to print on something a little sturdier, like mixed media paper or watercolor paper, just put that on the bottom, kind of where I have my jelly print today. Put that on the bottom and you'll be able to print on top of that. So I'm going to take my sketch paper and press it on top, holding it with one hand and kind of pressing, not firmly, but giving a little pressure with one hand. And taking my time going through it. I don't want the material to move a lot, so I want to take my time with it for sure. And once I feel like I've gone all the way through, just very carefully, I'll lift up my print, my paper. You can see I've got a nice print here. And then very carefully, I'll pick up my plant material, my thyme, and whatever purple flower this is. And I have a second print here. So again, it's that kind of mirror image, but that's one way to print multiple. You want to make sure you ink it all up first and then lay it out and press it together. All right. Well, hopefully this process is enjoyable. I want to encourage you to kind of think outside the box when it comes to plant material, natural material that you can bring in. Try printing it out. This one opens the door to a little bit of play, figuring out what plants might work best for this printing process. But also you may get some clever ones, some interesting patterns and designs. Keep your eye out for those good pieces of texture that you can print with our block printing ink and paper. Well, happy printing, everyone. We'll see you soon.